Well, it looks like we're finally live here. A little bit of a delay due to some technical issues, but as we, I guess, get started with the podcast or the show in general, we're going to have, I'm sure, a lot of these in general. But welcome to episode two, and ultimately, I guess we'll start off. Anything in the news for the past week that kind of caught your eyes, or for either of you guys that just seemed kind of out of the blue, or just same old privacy violations? Nothing really changed.
Well, the first thing is I got my Rams gear out of the laundry. So there you go, Tejas. I'm suited up and ready to go. But I guess the biggest news is Colorado passed a new Privacy Act, huh?
Yeah, I guess I guess that makes Colorado, California, Virginia. I think those are the three. Maybe there's a fourth in the U.S. With some level of, I guess, protection for their people, which is interesting because I mean, Colorado's a boomtown right now, especially with COVID. I mean, a lot of people moving there. A lot of tech companies are obviously going there as well. Not that it really impacts, I guess, um, privacy at a global scale, but ultimately they're going to have some implications working closer with tech companies, and it's kind of interesting that they would implement something like that. That would probably be adverse to a lot of them as they're kind of flooding the state.
Well, when California was implementing it, I don't see any reason why Colorado won't, because all the lot of majority of ad revenues anyways in California.
True. Did you get a chance to go through it in detail, or just kind of? I mean, I only saw headlines. I didn't really get a chance to read anything specific. I'm not sure how much different, or if there's any X factors over other legislation that's already out there.
Yeah, I'm pulling up. I wish I could pull it up on the screen, but I got a chance to check out, read a little bit of what's going on there, and there's a couple of things that jumped out to me, and I'll just kind of throw them out there to you guys. So I'm actually just going to read from my screen here. I wish I could share it on this machine, but one of the things it says around this particular one with Colorado, it says there's an opt-out thing where it says consumers have the ability to opt out of data sales, targeted advertising, and high-risk automated profiling. And then this other thing that really stood out, they have an opt-in kind of thing in here, and it says, as with the CDPA, businesses must seek opt-in consent before collecting or processing sensitive personal data, which includes data revealing an individual's race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, health conditions, genetic or biometrics information, sex life or sexual orientation, and citizenship status. Notably, geolocation information is not sensitive for these purposes, unlike CDPA. To me, that's a pretty big distinction.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like at this point, I mean, that location is just maybe considered ubiquitous that, I guess limiting that would, I wouldn't say cripple, but most people just opt into it and let it go, right? I mean, like we talked about in the last show, under the guise of maybe user experience, you'll say, give me location access, and people will do it. But I guess maybe either way, I guess even if you're tracking in the background, you don't have to disclose it still. So just another day, I guess.
One other thing here that they say is a little different from the California law is they have this secondary uses restricted. And it says one area where the CPA goes beyond the CCPA and the CDPA is with the introduction of a new duty to avoid secondary use. This duty prohibits covered organizations from using data for purposes that are not reasonably necessary or compatible with the specified purposes for which the personal data are processed. That sounds like a lot of legalese, but it almost sounds like if you're the first party and you're using a secondary party service and they do something, I'll just throw out the nefarious term since we've been using that over the last couple of days. It seems like you're actually still in the line of fire, which goes beyond what's going on some of these other state regulations. I thought that was a good that actually puts the emphasis on companies to really know who they're dealing with and what their that party's data policies are, in addition to what your own policies are.
It'll be good to get into some of these specifics when you include language like reasonably. Well, that reason definition of reasonably varies by person or who you ask, right? I like the law from Netherlands that basically said cold calling is not allowed. Well, that's pretty clear, right? Unless you got the phone number from the individual you're calling, you're not allowed to call a person. We need some straightforward ones like that defined, and then on top of it, add this additional reasonable uses of that data. But at the macro level, though, I think what we are really seeing is people waking up, states waking up, legislators waking up. It's 3 states or 4 states for now, but we should expect this across the board. And every country is going to go through it. We are just in the first innings.
Are we kind of heading into some kind of a tsunami or hurricane or something, or some kind of tragedy event? Because if all these states come out, with their own privacy regulations, and they each have things that are kind of similar, but then different, and there's going to be differences. Let's face it. Some states are going to go further than other states. And how much of an issue is that going to be if we got 50 different privacy regulations that can go in 50 different ways, and we're all trying to, even if you're trying to be good about this, are we heading into some danger zones with all these, state regulations that could make it very difficult for any of us to do anything we really want?
The compliance part of it is going to be a major part, and a lot of companies, particularly vendors, and the ones like small businesses will suffer from this, because they have to be compliant with, say, 50 different regulations, and it's not going to be cheap, and it's not going to be easy when your hands are tied in 50 different ways. And again, it goes back to few vendors that are extreme violators of this, and everyone else suffering from their violation. I think that has to be addressed, and you have to really go to the source and say and punish the ones that are violated. Otherwise, the small businesses who may not have the resources to be compliant or put in the time and effort to understand every single regulation at every single state are the ones that will be suffering, not the real violators. Even at this point, $1 billion or $2 billion is not a big deal for these big businesses, but a few $100,000 for a small business to put something towards compliance is a big deal, and those are the ones we'll end up hurting, and that certainly is concerning.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the larger the organization, the more likely you would spend money on either let's call it lobbying or compliance, to build out the compliance for every single 50 states that comes up with their own some odd version of it, versus the small business, like Raju was saying, it could cause a rise of maybe third-party services that manage compliance for you, and that could be a good thing. It could cause a rise of, maybe people want to move to a certain state because privacy regs are more protected in that state, right? I think if anything, probably maybe some more COVID stuff would show that certain states will have certain policies, and people align themselves with that state's political stance or how they treat certain issues, and they'll relocate to that state. Kind of like the California migration to maybe Texas or Miami are big examples, right? People seem to identify with what those cities' choices are, and they want to be a part of that rather than doing it. So kind of voting with your bodies themselves. The alternative is maybe just VPNs that do things. A little while ago, I saw an article on Hacker News, and it was about some person that wanted to cancel their New York Times subscription, and they were in some state, and to cancel it, you either had to email or call them or go through some crazy system to cancel that subscription. But if you're in California, you're required to have some online system for opting out. And so a normal person in the States wasn't able to opt out easily, popped in the VPN, went over to the website and thinking that they were in California, gets the opt out form and is able to cancel right away. Should that be the case of what really actually happens? Maybe not, but could be the case of whichever state ends up with the best privacy policy at the end of the day. Maybe that's where either I want to personally be, or at least that's where I'll let companies think I am at the base level, right? I mean, that's an easy thing with the VPN. But then companies are pretty smart about VPNs too, so I guess you never really know. As the more you try to protect yourself, the more they're going to find a way to find you. So,
are we heading towards a need for almost sort of like a bill of rights, a customer data privacy bill of rights that's enacted with some basic ground level rules that should be applied across the the states, country, whatever, the nation, and then it's up to states to do add on top of that, because it just seems to me like this could get very complex. I think we're just starting to see these state legislatures kind of putting these things together. I can see a real mess coming if there isn't some sort of, at least, like the Bill of Rights. There's like these 10 principles that you have to enact across the country, and whatever you want to do on top of that, go for it. But it seems like if we don't have some kind of cohesion and an agreement on just a foundational level of what privacy should mean at a root level across the country, then we're kind of heading into some really tough waters going on with this privacy thing.
Privacy code is the new tax code. That's where we are headed. And you're right that there should be a few things that have to be set. And the first one I would say is freedom of data. Users should own their data and should know and should control how their data is being used, and should have the freedom to take their data and make sure that they are in control of it. Like that, it'll be, if we have such things at a broad level defined, the abuse is going to be controlled significantly, and we won't get into this mess of every state and every country putting up their own legislation.
See, I hear people talking about the pulling your data out and things along those lines, but I guess, I mean, to go run into your example of privacy code is the new tax code, we've seen kind of how tax code has kind of evolved into a hot mess, and I can't imagine anything different for the way privacy would go down as well. But an organization that collects data, they'll give you the right to download your data. How usable that data is, how readable it is, how organized it is. I'm sure there's a way to, if I wanted to mash up the data and make it look as ugly as possible in a massive 5 gig file that nobody would ever want to download or take out, I can impose all sorts of, technological trickery to make that process as painful as humanly possible, hoping that maybe even if 5% end up backing out and not agreeing to pulling their stuff out, that's still a win for me, right? It still probably justifies the engineering effort that put into making that experience as bad as possible, right? So, I mean, it could be, I would say, like, it's good to be able to pull your data out, but then I guess what do you really do with your data? It's more about ensuring that your stuff got deleted and it's not being used, rather than just, when you say you own your data, you kind of feel like you want to hold on to it or have that file in hand. But what you do with that file, I guess, is a little bit different. One thing, I mean, I think one of the most foundational things of this privacy code is really, I would say, like, plain English transparency, right? Like, imagine you signed up for a service and you agree to the terms and conditions. It's great. They got to send you an email that says, look, these are the data points that we have on you, right? Kind of similar to how Apple's App Store does it. I don't think the Apple App Store labels really enforce anything. I think it's the companies opt into it. So maybe you take that with a grain of salt about how many identifiers they actually have. But ultimately, like, in plain English, I signed up for your service. These are the 10, 20, 100, 1,000 data points that I can associate with your account, right? And it could get messy. The bigger the company, the more trickery they do. It could be bad, but ultimately everything ends up getting covered by these privacy policies online. And you just, you agreed to it, but you have no idea what you really agreed to, and it covers their butts, and so they're not really worried about it either, right? Reasonable use, like you said, that's the worst words in probably any kind of policy ever.
And I guess the other thing too is, as new technology comes out and it gets adopted, and people, let's face it, man, people with nefarious motives they're going to use whatever technology is available to try it out.
Mhm.
So everything is constantly changing and evolving with this stuff, and the evolution is happening at an accelerated rate, which means we're constantly going to be having these challenges, and we don't even know what specific challenges lie ahead, but we know there're going to be some. How do you prepare? How do you write legislation for that kind of thing? Because we got the Constitution when we talk about the nation's laws, and then we have these amendments. There's only been 26, 27 amendments. I don't think you can keep up with the technology, and I don't think you can keep up with the bad guys if we try to set like 10 commandments, these 10 privacy commandments set in stone, and by the time they get passed by a law, they're outdated because the technology is improved to the point where now things that we hadn't even dreamed of, and people are doing things that we never imagined to get the access to this data. So how is legislation enough? Do we have to figure out a way to have some sort of alliance with companies that maybe start with the big companies? Because let's face it, the big companies are the ones that are kind of driving the train right now.
Well, I think yes, the legislation has to be done. It has to be done fast, and also when there is an abuse, what are we doing now? We are really slapping on the wrist. That's it. So few $1 million or a few tens or hundreds of $1 million is just a slap on the wrist for all of these big companies. They consider it cost of doing business, and then move on to the next one and next one. What are we doing as for repeat abusers? Instead of a flat amount, if we take a slightly different approach and say we're going to take a percentage of your revenue as a fine, not a number in there. For repeated abuse that keeps going up, then that catches up over a period of time, and that has to be strictly enforced. And then there is an incentive for them to take it seriously. So there is, and there are other ways to do it, but it has to be taken seriously in the first place.
I think GDPR does percentage of revenue, or technically, I think what was it, up to 3% of revenue as a potential fine? I'm not sure anything's ever been levied that high. The max is maybe a couple billion here and there for Facebook and Google, and that doesn't even register on the 3% scale. So I guess they haven't really put their foot down and said, we're going to make an example of this for whatever reason. But I mean, I guess the potential is there. I mean, I would circle back, and ultimately, Raju, what you said earlier is probably maybe the crux of the entire story. Is the small businesses is really what is kind of getting squeezed the most here, because that increased compliance cost and kind of concern in general for even their own customers. Imagine I just had a basic, a pizza shop here in Austin, and I maybe had some POS system, and maybe I had some website and some online ordering system, maybe 3 simple apps that I use to run my entire business, right? I make pizza. I'm not in the privacy game. I'm not in the customer data game. Maybe I want to market to my customers, but that's the extent of it, right? How does that person really clearly understand how people will, how this information is being tracked? Maybe they do care about privacy and want to make sure their customers' information isn't being sold off to the POS system or the marketing firms and the email marketing and the social media and all that stuff. But that's not like front and center. And so their first, I would say, instinct is essentially to find generally either the most popular or the cheapest tools. And I think there's probably a very high correlation between the most popular and cheapest tools with the amount of egregious privacy violations that they're doing, essentially, right? Because there's a reason they're the cheapest or the most popular. It's because they got big enough by basically violating privacy for a very long time, and that's why they're kind of household names, right?
Yeah, but you just mentioned the magic word free or cheap or and let's face it, a lot of folks gravitate towards things that are inexpensive or cheap and use the heck out of them. And a lot of folks do that with the right intentions in mind. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is this article that was written about 4 or 5 months ago. I think the title is like the cost of using a free service to your
yeah.
And the person, the article's about an organization, very good intent, and they wanted to create a website for the organization. And the person developing the website, in the article, one of the sentences that stood out to me is, "We don't want to track our people or members of our organization. That the purpose of this is not to track; it's to help out." But they used tools that were free that ended up making them an accessory to data tracking. And I got an image here. Maybe we could talk through this image, because it kind of illustrates, I think, the plight of a number of people who are putting together websites, and it could be for their business, it could be for an organization they support. But a lot of instances when you're putting together a website, you're looking to kind of use plugins and add-ons that make creating the website easier to do and easier to maintain and manage. But the cost of that is illustrated in this thing here. They knew that they were installing 3 add-ons, one from Twitter, one from Facebook, and one from Discuss. But what they didn't know is the one from Discuss, the plugin they added from Discuss for the commenting system, it makes it easier to have people comment and get the conversation going. But what they didn't know was that one track, or the one add-on / tracker, or whatever you want to call it, it actually installed 21 additional ones that they didn't know about. They had no clue that was going to take place. And they probably don't even have direct relationships with those different software providers. So all of a sudden, a company or a user or organization that says the main goal, one of our main goals is not to track people, it's just to help people, they end up doing kind of the exact opposite of what they expected. And they had the right intentions, but making the kind of the cheaper free choice of plugin led to potential data going all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, this is just crazy. Yeah, go ahead, Raju. You go first.
You may think you're dropping a cookie, but they are dropping a cookie jar here. And each of them, even something, you may think you're embedding something like a tag manager, like a Google tag manager. And that a tag manager is something that is embedded, but at the back end, there could be 20, 30, 50, who knows, number of embed codes that are embedded inside in there. So that's essentially what you're doing, because you cannot trust each of these and assuming that that will protect your information. You really have to question every single source there.
Let's talk about this in the sense of that Colorado. Let's see if I can bring this up now. Okay. This kind of goes back to the secondary uses thing. So what are the implications when, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't talk definitively about it. I'm just kind of wondering, if you're like that person in that story where your intent is not the data track, you build a website, you use certain add-ins and plugins. One of those, it could only be just one of those plugins opens up or installs 21 other potential trackers. And now you've lost control. You don't know where the data is going, how it's being used. Are we starting to see regulations pop up that could put you on the hook if you do something as simple as kind of make a mistake by choosing the wrong free provider?
And Brent, you know what could be actually worse that just popped into my head? In that kind of a situation, who is the one that gets stuck holding the bag? The small business that didn't know what they were doing because they either didn't know enough or were misled, or is it Discuss or some mega data brokerage that is the one collecting the data, right? Yeah. I think it's a small business that holds the bag on that one, right? And that's the worst part of the whole thing, because all liability is off of the Amazon, the Google, the Rakuten, and Nielsen, and whatever other trackers were on that screenshot you had earlier. But in general, I mean, on that Sparta website, what does Nielsen, which does like TV ratings and kind of audience tracking and things along those lines, need to know about this, right? Amazon shopping, is that really relevant to the content on this page? Rakuten, also another shopping network type of situation. Amazon shopping, obviously, and ads. These are all like irrelevant. You couldn't even, or I guess I'm sure some high-priced lawyer could probably make the argument that they are connected, but arguably they're not, right? And I think the worst part is the small business just holding the bag on all these things is going to end up being kind of the worst part of the whole thing.
And how is that small business? If you just think this through, right? The small business is getting a service for free. How are they paying for it? They're not paying for it using their data. They're paying for it using their customers' data that their customers do not know about. This is no different from some of the discussions we have had last week, where we talked about paying for an access to an app through your contact list, or basically giving up your contact list. This is essentially the same. Instead of contact list, you're giving up the information about your website visitors and all the associated data just to get a free service. So in other words, these so-called free services are Trojan horses. And these used to be paid services, but because these are Trojan horses, they were made free so that they get broader adoption. Take a simple application like, say, Google Analytics with around 85% market share. It's free. Prior to that, analytics used to be an expensive, or actually a priced service, not from Google, but there used to be a market for that. But now, in the name of free, we have gone to the other end, where tracking and data has become the currency of exchange.
I'm not 100% on this one, but if I remember correctly, on Google Analytics, you install the tag manager and all that stuff. And for let's say a normal website that's like a blog about, I don't know, privacy, let's call it, right? And I want to use Google Analytics to see page views, which pages are getting the most views, stuff like that, very basic stuff. But once you want to get into demographic information, you have to basically enable the double-click integration with Google's AdSense or whatever in order to get, is it people from a certain state, or is it people with certain income levels, or all that kind of stuff, right? And to a privacy conscious person, you would kind of understand, how am I getting demographic information? It's through tracking that's been done for these people. But for a normal person who just wants to try to maybe expand the reach of whatever it is they're writing about, they would turn it on, and now all that data goes back. So it stops kind of being like website analytics in the sense of just what pages are popular and which ones aren't, to now all that information being shared back because you just wanted to get a little bit more information out of it, right? And Google Analytics, what is that? Something like 85, 87, give or take % of market share, which, I mean, arguably is straight up monopoly, really, if you count it at that point, right? There was another tool I found recently. It's called Fathom. I feel like the website is Get Fathom, Use Fathom. I think it's Use Fathom. We can put it in the notes or something later. But it's basically like I think if you just Google, ironically, or DuckDuckGo, really, Google Analytics alternative privacy. I think in general, that's going to be one of the more popular search terms that end up popping up, is any type of product, alternative privacy are going to be the two things you kind of just tack on to any product you're looking for, just to find out what else is out there that doesn't just blatantly violate people.
And these are free tools which are actually Trojan horses, and it takes even we don't think much about Google Fonts. Google Fonts is a free service, but font is a new pixel, right? Just like you download something in the pixel-based tracking that you see in the emails. Well, fonts are used essentially for the same purpose. Where when you download that font dynamically, well, that means you're getting a lot of this information. Be it a Facebook a like button, or maybe an add this thing from Oracle, where social share button. All of these are Trojan horses that are offered for free to get broader adoption. That means they're collecting all this data at the back end. And all it needs is embedding a tracker, embedding a simple tracking code. They make it damn easy, convenient to embed it. But what's happening underneath is the key. When you embed something, what do they do with the data? It's crazy where when a user browses the entire website, some of the data can be used to pretty much replicate the entire user session. You can create a video of users' navigation, their scrolling, where their mouse moved, which page did they go to, what did they type into a form. All of these can be replicated, and you can send a video to the user on saying, hey, this is the recording of your session on a website. Of course, they don't reveal any of that information. That is the extent to which this tracking goes. And today, that is prevalent on the website, and maybe you can look for the trackers that are available on the websites. Nobody's talking about the mobile apps. Mobile apps have such tracking. The same session recording, in this case, instead of a mouse, you're using a touchpad and touch as an input and whatnot, and the same set of tracking exists. And there's no easy way to block those two. And mobile is an important one, and everyone has been using it. And what kind of abuse that is going on mobile hasn't been explored deep enough today, and that has to be.
Yeah, see, on browsers, you can easily just put like a, uBlock Origin or some kind of ad tracker or blocker, and you'll find out third-party domains. Even Safari has it built in, right? But on the mobile example, I mean, you pop in a Facebook SDK, Lord knows what you're sending these guys, right? Your Google SDKs, your Mixpanel SDKs, right? All these SDKs that are under the hood, and even for a technical person who's privacy conscious, unless you're very technical, you're not digging through an app's code and figuring out how that information is going. There's tools you can do to figure out network requests from an app and stuff like that. But even the most privacy conscious people are not going down that deep of the rabbit hole. Generally, just because probably it's out of sight, out of mind, or there isn't an easy way to really block or track that kind of stuff currently, right?
Well, that blocking and tracking, and you can do blocking and whatnot, right? But what you block and what you restrict is just what's above the surface. The iceberg is deeper than what appears. What they do at the back end is like fingerprinting, and that is a deep thing in itself, where they know which browser you're visiting from, which location you're visiting from, what are the other tabs you have open, and whatnot. There's a back-end level fingerprinting that you have to go the extra mile to even try to restrict it, VPN to whatnot. But there's a whole different ocean there. So trackers, blockers, cookies are all only surface level things. The iceberg that is only visible above the water, but there is a whole other tech that goes in. And there are about maybe billions or hundreds of billions, or I should say trillions now, riding on this market, and it's complicated.
I think the underground tech thing is a crazy thing. I'm not sure if you saw the article maybe it was in the last week about the W3C standards, and basically it's like web standards around the world, right? And this is the underlying technology of how all websites and web communication basically works. And it's used to be made up of like academics and researchers and stuff along those lines. But now you have those same people who now took a fat paycheck and go to Google or Facebook or Amazon. These are the people who are on the board for this W3C and creating standards for why privacy is not that important, or how these tracking things, right? It's very easily that we could have had, advancements of the web, 1.0, 2.0, whatever, without the need for all these cookies and tracking and cross-site scripting and all these kind of underlying things that were created in the name of innovation, but ultimately were really in the name of exploitation, because the people who were on that board making those standards have a direct conflict of interest in terms of what's good for the world and what's good for the company. And the reason that I'm on this board, Google, for example, will pay this person $500,000, $1 million, $2 million a year simply to sit on this board and spit stuff about their credentials. They're smart, they're probably well respected in their field, but you throw $2 million at somebody and you're telling me that they're going to think about privacy and not their paycheck? Get out of here.
There is another aspect to it. What you think they know about you is different from what they actually know about you. Let me give you my example from last week. I have an Apple card, credit card, right? So I have this approved, and in the recent keynote, Apple introduced, I think, Apple Card Family or something. So I thought, okay, I'll get my wife, an Apple card. So we sat together, and I looked at the list and said, she's not available. She's not eligible for an Apple card. I was surprised. And then we logged into her account, and we were trying to to understand why she wasn't available. Then we noticed that there was a typo in her date of birth. She got her year wrong. I changed the year to the correct year and saved it. Immediately, she was eligible to receive the credit card. Look at what happened. Apple knows original date of birth for my wife, and they also know that she input the wrong information. So what you think they know is different from what they actually know. In a lot of cases, they know a lot more about us than what we provide them, thanks to all the trackers, all the backend information that they're automatically collecting and pulling everything together. A lot of this happens. So in other words, you think you can get away from lying, but they know that you're lying. That is the reality we are in.
I want to put up that image that Raju you shared in our chat. The numbers are just unbelievable in terms of Google, and I think you already talked about Chrome has a 65% or thereabouts market share. Look at Google Analytics. Look at how all the websites, the percentage of websites that use Google Analytics. And then we're not even going to mention like Gmail and how many people are using Gmail and all countless interactions that are going on there. I mean, the amount of information currently in one company's hands is pretty unreal. And I think isn't that kind of why there was the pushback with the Flock? I mean, they're looking to phase out third-party cookies, which everybody's used to and kind of knows how they work, and put in something that really came from the brainchild of one organization. The organization already has 85% of websites using Google Analytics and 65% of the browser market. Are we getting into an even more danger zone where one company can kind of steer what people, who has access to what at this point?
I thought that was already the case.
They've built the operating system for surveillance, and the thing is, it is easy for them to connect the dots about our information than for us to opt out of it. If you have to opt out, you have to go to every single provider and ask them to delete the data. But when they're collecting the data, they will they are tying everything in and seamlessly integrated. So they focused on the other problem, and there has to be a solution at the other end where you should have an option to, or maybe there's a service idea where you provide all the services where you have accounts and information in, and maybe some other service can go and delete the data on your behalf, or at least request a delete.
Taylor chimed in. Absolutely. How could I forget Android? I mean, let's say, I don't want to just gang up on one company, but let's say we have W3C, right? And the initial intent of that was a steering committee that was supposed to be very kind of unbiased and looking at, putting in standards, that will work for, the majority, can't work for everybody. But when those steering committees, kind of are starting to have a makeup of almost sort of like lobbying to a certain extent, how can it? Because even the guys that already have the power, they want to keep the power, and then their competitors who want to extract the power, so they're looking at it from their standpoint more than they're looking at it for the greater good, I think. How do we get this solved? I mean, how do we get to a point, and maybe this is too big of a question for us to try to solve right now, but it feels like there's so many things working against privacy to get it to where we need it to be. What are the first things that should happen? Or is it these states coming up with their privacy laws? Should it be, a consortium of companies, trying to kind of self-police themselves? What do you think is the best way to get this going?
I mean, it'll be good to look back and say there was a point where smoking was very prevalent. How did we get to where we are today, right? And I think Sridhar mentioned this. Tracking is the new smoking, or some such thing. And how did we cross that? End of the day, I think it comes with education. If users push back on this, then the companies will have to comply. There's no way around it. And so what we have to do is educate the users and make sure that they are asking the right questions, and companies will be forced to comply. It's not going to happen overnight. It'll take years, maybe even decades, but it has to start with a pushback, a strong pushback from users against these companies. That means not using their services, moving to an alternative browser, maybe an alternative operating system. All of these will come from users knowing what's happening with their data and them deciding opting in or opting out. So that is what becomes the beginning of a movement here.
Yeah, I think ultimately transparency is really the key. I'm not sure we really escaped from, the data collection and big data analysis that, through the digital age, we're going to end up having more and more of, which may or may not be the end of the world. I mean, more data could be good for making services better and things along those lines. But ultimately, it's just the shady transparency of what is happening. That's kind of the biggest problem, right? And then that information not being spelled out in plain English and being very clear to the user about what's actually happening, and then let them make the decision of if I want to continue going down this route or not. But hiding it behind privacy policies and in terms and conditions and stuff like that, that's not going to be good. And the only way you can get to transparency is, like you said, making your position known based on your usage habits, how you choose to interact with things, the types of tools you use, and kind of how you try to take it back. But I mean, education is key. I think it's hard. Education is obviously a luxury for a lot of people too, right? Being able to have the time to learn about these things and understand how it impacts you, adversely in life, isn't something that everybody has right off the bat. And so, I mean, just kind of like how small businesses could be left holding the bag on some of this compliance policy, I think it could ultimately be like maybe even a class thing where, privacy is a luxury for the rich, and tracking is for people who aren't that well off and are basically prey for these kind of free tools and tools that other people don't have the access to, right?
Wow, those are great answers. I was actually hoping one of you would say you could start first by continuing to watching privacy, but
yeah, that's your job.
Those are good answers too.
We're not marketers, Brent. But that is probably a good wrap up, though. We started a little bit late, but in general, we'll be back next week again, and hopefully there's nothing bad in the news, but I'm sure we'll find something, and we'll go down this rabbit hole even further. Thanks again, Brent and Raju, and see y'all next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Adios.
I forgot I'm the guy that.
You got to end it.